Welcome to Close the Gap Research. We formed out of the original group that fought the referendum last Saturday, and that group was called Recognise a Better Way. And thanks to all those who supported our campaign against The Voice. Look, we won that battle, but we haven't won the war. The war is how do we help out those Aboriginal people who are still in great need. About 20% of Aboriginal people are not doing well. 80% are doing just about as well as every other Australian. So we know in a way how to succeed, but there's something wrong with and for that last 20% of Aboriginal people. We intend to tackle that with Close the Gap research. The key here, I think, is that we concentrate on three big points: schooling, jobs, and, a bit sadly here, people coming out of jail, rehabilitation. You know, 20% of Aboriginal men have been to jail. Now, everyone worries about the amount of money being spent in this area, the billions of dollars, and they worry whether it's been wasted. I don't mind how much money's being spent. We just want to know what works. So we're going to concentrate on what we call performance audits. We will be asking service providers, whether they're run by Aboriginal people or not, doesn't matter. We're asking them, what is your measure of outcome? Does the kid deserve the scholarship? Is it based on merit or need? Does the trainee get a job? And for the person that comes out of prison, do they get a job? And do they keep a job and stay out of jail after, say, 3 years? Now, that's simple stuff, but those measures are often not required by government or philanthropy. Aboriginal people are not angels or fallen angels. We must take them as we find them. If they're in strife, show the strife. Show what we have to work with. Show what we have to do for people, and then apply it to these three programs. And I think undertaking this work will show that there's a lot of goodwill, and we'll have better results, and hopefully we can close the gap over a number of years. Thank you. I look forward to you joining us.
Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax. They want their heads ripped.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The answer is Mike, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone that is watching this. If you are watching this live on Facebook, Rumble, or YouTube, you know the deal. You can contribute to today's conversation in the chat. We want to hear from you. We love hearing from the audience and hearing your views. And the link to StreamYard is also there if you want to call in and ask a question or just have your say. So let's kick things off. We've got a very important discussion to talk about today that I think has been neglected since the Voice referendum in October 2023. But to let you know, the best way to support us is by heading to Command the Narrative. Now, if you choose to do so, just like John did last week, he sent us $1,000 donation, which was incredible and amazing. So thank you, John. You can head to Commanding the Narrative and hit the donate button at the top. You can donate to us directly, or you can go through Buy Me a Coffee. Some people like either or. So whatever you choose, it helps to pay for the stream, it helps to pay for the website, and most importantly, gives me a very warm and fuzzy feeling inside. And while you're on the main page of commandingthenarrative.com, please hit the sign up button in the top right hand corner. You've got a regular newsletter from me, and heading to the website is the best port of call. Don't rely on social media. Go straight to the website. You can get all our podcasts, any articles and newsletters that I might put out, and also upcoming events. If you want to know who's on the podcast in the week ahead, head to commandingthenarrative.com and you can get all of that there. I'll also let you know about Australians for Better Government. We had a big event 2 Sundays ago, which was very, very successful. You can head to australiansforbetter.com nswpol.com and watch that full event there with Kevin Lockray, Darren de Bortley, the Honourable John Ruddick, and also Councillor Adam Zara. So check that one out. We've got some more events in the works. So hopefully I can announce that in the coming weeks once we get those locked in. And also support our movement. We want to really push ahead with Australians for Better Government, which is all about reforming our system of government. It's not favouring any political party. It's non-partisan. It's just the structure of our government and our constitution. That's what we want to have a look at, get under the hood and fix some things there. So let's kick things off today. We've got a returning guest. It's been about in a week's time, it would be 2 years since we spoke to him last, Dr. Gary Johns. Now, he's a former member of Parliament from 1987 to 1996. He was in the federal Parliament. He was a member of the Keating ministry. He's also written the book, which is Burden of Culture, which is highly recommended to by anyone you care to ask. He's also prolific in writing. He's working on a couple of books now, actually, and he's also the chairman of Close the Gap Research, which is what we're going to be talking to him a lot about today. So let's bring him on. Dr. Gary Johns, welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Thanks, Stephen. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you as well. Now, as I said, it's been 2 years since we spoke to you, and that was prior to the Voice referendum. We haven't had a chance to speak to you since then. And I went back last night and I re-listened to the podcast that we did do with you. And the thing that really stood out to me, because it took us back to that time leading up to the Voice and the feelings and the arguments and everything that was going on at that time, the thing that stood out in my mind is that we really dodged the bullet with this thing, didn't we? Like we got out of harm's way by the skin of our teeth almost.
We did, and it was a tough battle. But look, sadly, we won the battle, but I think we're losing the war because all of those in the yes case and all the millions of dollars, and of course all the Aboriginal leadership who are mainly on government payrolls are still out there seeking special privileges for themselves based on descent. So the arguments haven't gone away, but we certainly dodged a bullet. We won a battle, that is to save the Constitution and to save the notion of equality and citizenship. But by golly, they're still at us.
And one of the silver linings of the Voice was that it did raise a lot of issues with Aboriginal people here in Australia. And I think a lot of people were educated in those issues, including myself. There were certain things that I didn't know about that I now know because of that campaign. But one of the things it did raise was the disadvantage of some Aboriginal people. That you say, majority of Aboriginal people are living just like the rest of us, but there are some disadvantaged ones out in rural remote communities and places like that can't get access to some of the things that we enjoy here in the cities. But has that changed since the Voice? Did that get addressed? We seem to have just moved on from the referendum, and those issues seem to be ignored.
Well, they're ignored because those people in charge of Aboriginal policy, which is mainly the left of politics, simply don't want to be confronted by the fact that they don't have an answer that's suitable to their view. There are answers. They just don't like the idea of people, for instance, having to come off country or to change their view of the world and change their culture, to learn English, to stay at school for 10 or 12 years. They don't like those answers. What the leadership want is to say, you stay on Aboriginal country and you live like an Aborigine, and we'll chase after you and see if we can help. And of course, we can pour any amount of money in. If someone doesn't change their attitude between their ears, then no amount of money is going to help. In fact, the more money we pour in to a person who expects to be given things, the greater the harm. So that's what's happening. We have, if you like, an ideological position which the left, Labor and so on, will not move off. And until they do, no policy that they prescribe will help. But there are ways that we can work around that.
So leading into The Voice, you were the head of Recognise a Better Way. That's morphed into Close the Gap Research. You're the chairman of that organisation. What have you been doing in the last year and a half since the Voice referendum? Where has your work been focused?
We concentrated initially on 3 papers on scholarships for Aboriginal children, remote area employment, and recidivism. Those people have gone to jail and may well return to jail. And there are 3 really good basic papers. So, for instance, concentrate on the scholarship one. There are good people raising funds for scholarships for Aboriginal kids. My worry is they cherry pick. They say, well, here's an Aboriginal kid and we'll raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and get that kid through, often an expensive boarding school. To which I say, would that student have graduated anyway? So you're not only got to spend the money, you can claim the victory, but I say, is it your victory? Did you just take a kid out of Darwin who could have gone to Darwin High School and put him in a southern school, and when he graduates say, look, see what we did? I'd say, well, that would have happened anyway at about 1/10 the cost. But not to be too critical, I've learned you have to make allies in this game. There are a lot of good people who have tremendous experience in running boarding schools, especially regional boarding schools. And we want to say, how about we don't concentrate on the 1 in 100 kid, the really bright one, who's going to make it anyway? What about the 99 who don't make it, who are sitting in mainly in remote communities? They don't go past, they don't even go to grade 10. They just simply don't turn up and they're lost to the system. And I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm sort of more in lobbying mode at the moment, where I'm talking to particular governments and to boarding schools and to mining companies to say, if you're going to put money aside, say, during native title negotiations or native title compensation negotiations, put it into trust funds that have very narrow objects. That is, the money must be spent on the boarding school education of a descendant child. So bit by bit, we're trying to change the discussion to say, it's normal for a kid who lives in the middle of nowhere to leave home and go to school. And in there lies the hope that those children will learn about the wider world. And of course, we say it's a matter for them after graduation whether they go back home or not. But I know that they will leave and go on and have a better life. There'll be a lot of failure. A lot will simply go back home because it's such a huge chasm that they have to jump. I understand that. But there are great people running boarding schools. They have the experience and the knowledge. I think we have to massively upscale their offerings, and therein lies the way in which we will eventually close the gap.
So in the cold open video that I played at the start there, you mentioned 3 pillars. One was education, one was employment, and the other one was reforming Aboriginal people as they came out of jail. Now, that might seem like common sense, but maybe dig into that a little bit more. Why did you focus on those 3 pillars?
Well, those are the 3 most powerful points in people's lives, but in Aboriginal people in need. Obviously, education, everyone says, yes, that's the pathway to get them out. We've taken that a bit further, and I've just explained that. It has to be in a new setting, boarding school. It doesn't work in a remote community. Secondly, employment programs. There is always the hope in employment programs that you can provide skills for someone on country. Well, we've been at it since 1977. It generally doesn't work. What it dilutes into is a sort of a sit down money, keep them busy, go and tidy up, the back paddock or whatever, and tick a box and they're done. What we're saying is, and the remote area employment programs, and they've been renamed, they get renamed every few years, but but they're all remote employment or training programs. None of them work. And we say, because you're concentrating on community development. And we say, if there's no economic base here, how can you develop a community? If people can't read, write, speak English, then that's not a very strong basis on which to develop a community. I mean, you and I live in, I don't know, regional cities or whatever. We can operate there because we're sufficiently educated. And these places are already developed, but we don't develop a community. We are part of a community that is developed and we find our place in it. So it's a madness, this remote area employment program stuff. It's sort of like we will build a new Jerusalem on the back of people who can barely read and write and intergenerationally have been fighting and whose culture is very brutal and brittle. So can we just stop that? Can we stop that conversation and say there is no future for the vast majority of those communities? Unless a mining company comes onto your territory, there's nothing happening. And the best way home is to get those children into an educational environment, probably a boarding school, and give them a chance at life. Okay, that's the second leg, Stephen. The third one is the recidivism thing. Huge proportion of Aboriginal men and increasingly women end up in jail. That's a shame. They end up in jail because they commit crimes. It's not because we want to jail them. When they come out, the issue is, do they go back to their old life or do they hit a fork in the road and go on, get a job and so on? Now, we've got some mates who are providers just south of Newcastle who set up a group. I won't name them, but they set up a group to manage people who have come out of jail. And it's actually set up by 5 or 6 Aboriginal women, all of whose sons had been in jail and subsequently died young, some of them at their own hand. Very serious matter. They set up this outfit to get any subsequent people out of jail. They supply a guarantee, a driver's license and a job at the end of their stint, several months at the provision, right, at the place, sorry. Now, I talk to those people a lot and I say, well, what do other providers do? And they say, oh, what do your competitor providers, do, who run these programs? And they say, well, the funding departments, usually health departments, federal and state, will say, did the person enjoy their experience? Well, of course they did. They're out of jail, they're getting 3 meals a day and they're playing touch footy in quite nice surroundings. I've been there lots of times. But that's not a sufficient measure. The only thing that counts is, did they go back to jail? Now, my mates say, whilst we guarantee a job and a driver's license, it's very difficult to us to track, say, 3 years hence, whether they ended up back in jail. So they've asked the Commonwealth government to say, we'll give you permission, each person, to track the person's, say, social security number or whatever, to see if they ended up back in jail. The Commonwealth says no, they refuse. So we did a survey of other providers to see what they measured in terms of whether they were successful. And none of them had that signature measure that my mates did, which was a job and a driver's license. They just answered the department's question, which was, was it a satisfactory experience? But no one asks the top level question, which is how many stayed out of jail for a long period. Now, if you're not asking that, how do you know what you do is any good? So it's a simple question. We have to press governments to ensure they ask and measure and follow up. And for instance, if I fund a provider that has a 20% recidivism rate and another one that has a 50%, I'd tend to look at what the 20% one does. I'd say, well, are they better? Now, there may not be, might be different sorts of prisoners in different circumstances and older, younger and all that, but at least you can begin to compare to say, this program has a better chance of keeping a bloke or woman out of jail than that. Well, okay, we're not suggesting, you won't get 100% proof of probity here and success, sorry. You will get better success in some programs than in others. And I think we have to be happy with that, but at least we should know which one is better. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I was talking about during The Voice is truth telling. And, it's great to tell the truth, but sometimes telling the truth is talking about things that are uncomfortable. And that's what I like about the work that you do, and also some of the work that's up on the Close the Gap Research website, and also the YouTube channel. You've made a whole bunch of videos. I might start playing some clips from some of them, because I think they raise some very important issues that we need to have truthful conversations about. So this first one I'll play now. It's about what's happened to the Aboriginal people since a lot of these government programs have come into being.
We've got to understand that some of the things we changed in the last 50 years were for the worse. Here's the perspective of Roger Jeffress. He grew up on Elrose Station, Cloncurry. His grandfather took up that land in 1911. Roger grew up with Aboriginal people who were like family. He's seen firsthand and experienced the changes that have occurred in the last 50 years.
It's truly sad that now we're looking at probably 4 or 5 generations, where they've grown up not even seeing Dad work. And so they lost that thing was, when I'm old enough, I'm going to go and work like Dad. I'm going to go and work on Kamilaroi Station or Elrose Station, and I'm going to be as good as him at handling cattle. And that self-pride and that ambition to get out and do something. So unfortunately, we're looking at generations where it's been lost, any intention to work. And so then the knowledge that work means money, and money's been coming from a different way, and there's no need to work.
So it raises an important issue, and it goes back to when I read Warren Mundine's autobiography, and he spoke about how hard his father worked when he was growing up, and he looked to his father. He saw that ambition and rubbed off on him. It's a big part of anyone's development. It doesn't matter what race you are. This sit-down money, as Aboriginal people call it, where they just get government handouts, it's really killing them, isn't it?
I think so. Roger Jeffress was the gentleman we interviewed, and he was making the point that in his industry, cattle, there was a time when there were jobs available. Aboriginal people took them and were able to intergenerationally pass on the knowledge to kids. But it wasn't for very long, and unfortunately there are very few jobs left in that industry. But Roger makes the valid point. If someone in your household doesn't go out to work and the kids grow up seeing people not going out to work, they just don't understand it. The difficulty we have is, how do we put that child or those children in the way of people who work? Well, we tried with all of these make-up job programs in remote communities. As I said, we've been trying that since 1977. And it gives false hope. It's as if someone did work, but they don't. They simply take the money, they do a bit of cleaning up of rubbish, they do a little bit of really low-level training, and then they go off the system, wait for a while and come back onto it. No one actually goes out to work and creates value. And that's because in most of those communities, there's nothing there to create. You may be employed as a nurse's aide or a teacher's aide or whatever, but everyone knows you're just there as a gatekeeper. You're just there to fill up the numbers. You're not actually creating any value that anyone would pay for or buy. So that's why I think we have to take the leap and move the kids on with permission, of course, and with the support of hopefully family and friends and all the rest of it, and get them into a position where they will have the skills and the knowledge to get a job that actually creates value wherever it is in the world.
I was going to ask this question later, but I think it pops up now. One of the things I learned about during the Voice was native title and these land councils. That land councils are basically in charge of everything on that native title land. You were part of the Keating government when native title was brought in. So basically, for Aboriginal people living on this land, they can't own property. They can't really develop it. They really have no say at all. Do we need to revisit native title law? Has it worked? Has there been failures? What are your views?
Well, the High Court created this right, a native title right, or a bundle of rights over areas of land, and then we place that into legislation so there'd be, if you like, a system whereby people could claim, and it'd be a more certain set of means by which you could claim and settle the rights. And that's what's happened for 30-something years. And at this very moment, actually, the Australian Law Reform Commission is reviewing an aspect of native title called Future Acts. That is what happens from here on in a sense, to a native title area, and inevitably what happens when someone wants to come onto that land, and whether there be compensation paid or just payment for interference. Okay, and we made a submission to that and made it quite clear that half of native title holders have no income whatsoever. There's nothing in it for them. And why would there be? There's not a lot out there. But if you're the lucky few, the mining company that wants to mine in your territory, native title rights give you a little bit of leverage. You can seek some monies. And by and large, this has matured into a negotiation whereby the native title holders will say, look, can we get some jobs with it? Can we get some training for our children? That's a good discussion, but there's not nearly enough of that. What tends to happen is that the mining company or an agricultural company or whoever, might even be a rocket company, we've got one of those down South Australia, says, look, here's the negotiation, here's X million dollars, we'll put it into a trust, you blokes go off and spend it. And they spend it. It's consumption, right? We're saying to all of those interested parties, whether it's governments, mining companies, or native title holders, can you please put as much of the money as possible into these education trusts? If you need some provisions in your area, let government pay for that through programs. But let's put most of the new money into trust for your children, so those children will go to school, and probably, as I say, a boarding school. I think that it's the only path forward. So, Steve, I'm not getting around your argument at all. You can't undo native title. You can fiddle at the edges. You can talk about, smoother negotiations and greater rights and fund the negotiations, all the rest of it. And that's what the Australian Law Reform Commission will say. It'll bang on endlessly about making it easier for people to have negotiations, meaning the native title holders. But they can't answer this question, which is the one I put to them. How many make money out of it? The answer is very few. So we're just going to try to talk to as many native title holders as we can, so that when money becomes available, it's poured into what I call the exit strategy. The other thing too is, and we've put on the record, we think a native title holder, if they're getting nothing from it, should say, we'll hand our rights back to the Commonwealth in return for monies for our children. Now, I think that'd be a great deal. In other words, turn it into something. I don't think you'll get too many takers, because you could imagine that would cause a riot. The Aboriginal industry would say, it's a sovereign land, you can't do that. And I'd say, no, it's up to the traditional owners the native title holders. If they're getting nothing out of it and they want to hand it back to the Crown, if that's, I think it is possible, on the basis that the Crown, the Commonwealth in this case, or it could be state government, says, okay, we'll take it back, so it's now back to Crown land, and we'll put X dollars aside for your children. Because I can tell you that we're now into the second and third generation of native title holders. And the stories I have, and I've had discussions with native title holders who say, our kids don't really want this. You know, they're not living on land. They live somewhere else. They live in the city. They get a phone call someday from, you know, a telco company to say, oh, we want to put some poles up on your land. And the kid will say, what? Where? Oh, that's where Grandpa used to be. Now, they'll probably accept the money. But native title, I think, will mean less and less to a lot of Aboriginal descendants over time. They don't live there. They don't speak the language. They've come off country. They've got a job in the city, and they've moved on with life.
But what about the native title areas that do make money? You talked about, you know, mine comes in and then has to pay royalties to the land council. Is there any accountability of these land councils? Obviously there's good ones, but I assume there might not be so good ones as well. Does anyone look at the book?
There. Now, we need to distinguish land councils do not necessarily have anything to do with native title. They're established separate from and related to other matters, mostly in the Northern Territory over other mining monies, but nevertheless, they are around, and some of them do take on the role of managing native title for the native title holders, but it is a separate entity. Okay, so whoever runs it, is it properly run? If you have a look at the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporation website, you'll see so many of those corporations, native title bodies corporate, are in big trouble. They're constantly being put into administration. There's money that goes missing. They are given a re-education on governance, etc., etc. It is pretty much a schmozzle. So, you know, I'll leave that to the Office of the Registrar. I'm sure she's doing her very best, but we do need to take stock here and say, can we have a conversation that says, if you can't make it with the money you're getting, get out. We'll give you an exit strategy. It hasn't worked for you.
Okay, so I want to go back to one of these videos. This one deals with the relationship between Aboriginal people and, I guess, the rest of the Australian population, and how it's, I guess, deteriorated since the last few decades.
It may surprise people, but there used to be respect between Aborigines and whitefellas. Now there isn't. And we've got to understand that some of the things we changed in the last 50 years were for the worse. Here's the perspective of Roger Jeffress. He grew up on Elrose Station, Cloncurry. His grandfather took up that land in 1911. Roger grew up with Aboriginal people who were like family. He's seen firsthand and experienced the changes that have occurred in the last 50 years.
The biggest thing that you could remember in those days was that there was absolutely no resentment towards white man, and there was a respect, and that respect went both ways. And unfortunately, once the respect goes on either side, it disappears on both sides. And it's really sad when I think of the wonderful respect that both lots of people had for each other.
It's pretty sad that things seemingly have gone this way. You know, my dad used to talk about living on the Gold Coast up in Currumbin and having Aboriginal mates and playing football with them, and you know, they'd grow up together. Do you think there is a divide happening in recent times?
Oh, it happened. We were driven to it, if you like, during the referendum, weren't we?
Yeah, well, that's true. Yep.
So we have to distinguish. Most Aboriginal people get on with most other people, no problem. But there has arisen in the last generation or so a sort of the new leadership, nearly all university trained, who say, wow, I could make a career out of this, of being different. And they concentrate on the madness of identity. You know, I am an Aboriginal person. Yeah, but you're also, you know, husband, wife, worker, whatever, mate, taxpayer. But no, they want to be 100% Aboriginal. And they know that their best chance for a career is to say, we're so special, you need special rules to talk to us. So we're finding in public services, especially all around the country, federal and state, there are now designated positions. You hire an Aboriginal person for the job. And we say, but were they hired on merit? You know, can they actually do the job? Your job is to be in the Department of X and look after whoever needs the services of the Department of Education, Health, whatever. And that's pushed aside. And they say, no, we a lot of our clients are of Aboriginal descent. So if we hire an Aboriginal person, they'll know how to talk to an Aboriginal person, which is so insulting. I mean, they probably hire someone from the Gold Coast to talk to someone in Perth. I mean, there's nothing alike there. You talk to Aboriginal people, they are very particular about the areas in which they came from. They do not pretend to speak to others. But the new university mobs say, no, there's a pan-Aboriginality. We're Aboriginal, you know, we are a nation, blah, 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 blah. Or we're many nations, but when we seek money from government, then we speak as one. I don't think so. So there's a lot of falsity here that people have learned to be angry with the white man and want their slice of the pie based on nothing more than their ancestors were here first. And even though mostly they're now intermarried, there's very high intermarriage rate between Aborigines and non-Aborigines now. We are one, but the political discussion has become divided, and it's driven by, as I say, a new breed, a new class of leader who fated by the universities think they're really great. You know, nearly every university in the country has a vice chancellor brackets indigenous, and their job is they're just puppets, right? They're just put there to make the university look as though, gee, they're doing really good things for Aboriginal kids. No, you're not. What you're doing is undoing the good work of a generation back, where Aboriginal kids, just like working class kids, like women, like migrant kids, first got to university under the open system on merit and with some financial assistance, and then went their own way. Now, the Aboriginal group have captured that and said, no, we're going to lock that up. I know we got there. I know that Aboriginal leader got there, went to university, but now we want to corral that. It has to come through us. We become the gatekeeper, and we'll change the curriculum. You'll have to learn from us. We have special, they have this term knowledges now. What the hell that means, I don't know. So there's what we call a cultural curtain has come down, a bit like the Iron Curtain, that says, you can't know me, I'm an Aboriginal person, so you have to pay me either as a gatekeeper to tell you what can and cannot happen in this university, or I will tell you how you change your curriculum so that, for instance, you have Aboriginal knowledge in mathematics or literature, even though there wasn't any. So it's quite a nutty game that's going on out there, and you simply need to look at the people who are being employed in it, to look at the people whom we need to blame for the fact that we don't get on.
And I work close to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and you see it every time you drive across. You have the Australian flag, and then you have the Aboriginal flag, and there's just something about it that just doesn't sit right with me. It's almost uncomfortable, because I think it's just showcasing and highlighting that divide. And I even asked Jacinta Price this question when she spoke at a Centre for Independent Studies event, and she said it's just virtue signalling. But it's more than that. It's really highlighting that there is this. I mean, there isn't, as you say, I think most people just want to live together. And I don't think most Aboriginal people look at that and want the Aboriginal flag up there. I think most people would agree that we just want to see one flag and we be one people. But as you said, the political class just want to drive this divide for their own political advantage.
Yeah. Look, when the flag was first created, I think in the 1970s, perhaps a little later than that, it was a fascination. You know, it was part of that creating an identity. We're Aboriginal descendants, we're still here. Excuse me, and we all think, oh, that's okay. But now it's driving a separation. And it's also a falsity. There is no Aboriginal nation. There is no Aboriginal people who could stand under one flag because they all fight like crazy, just like we do.
Yeah.
So that's a falsity in itself. But the greater harm, of course, is to suggest that there's a nation within a nation, Aboriginal people sitting inside Australia, which diminishes all of us. It says that we're no longer a one nation. Yes, I use the term deliberately. You know, a singular nation where we're all citizens of that nation. And that was what was at the heart of the referendum, that people tried to say there were two classes of citizen, not, whiteys and Aborigines as an oppressed class, but in fact, Aborigines as a special class and the rest of us. And that was so damaging, and I was so angry. I mean, I almost forgive the left of the Labor Party and the idiots and the Greens for all that nonsense, but I'll never forgive the few right-wing Labor luminaries and left-wing Liberals who went along with that madness. They undermined, they did in the basics in civics in this country, which is equal citizenship. And I think they're a disgrace, and I don't have anything to do with them anymore.
Do you think there's a cowardice amongst them? I mean, you're not held back saying these things. I mean, I think you're just a truth teller, that you're dedicated to what you think is right, and you're going to prosecute that no matter what. But on, some of these people that you're talking about, do you think there's a tremendous cowardice on their part?
For some of them, it's cowardice. The cowardice are the ones who say nothing and just run along, sniff the wind, see how the numbers fall. So, for instance, there were any number of leaders of the opposition, Liberal leaders of the opposition among state governments, who just looked at the polling and said, well, look, we'll go with yes. Remember that leader in the West Australian Liberal Party who said yes, right to the last couple of minutes when she saw the polling was going to be no, and then she said, I'll go with no. Yeah, that's really brave of you. But there are those who actually believe in the cause. There are those Liberals who really think it was intelligent to vote yes and to hand power over to the likes of, Marcia Langton and Noel Pearson and all the rest of them, who would have lorded it over us and screwed unknown billions of dollars from us. To what effect? To leave that same 20% of Aborigines in need sitting on country, having a shocking life. They caused it. In effect, their mindset caused this, because they've stopped the path that in fact Marcia and Noel took, which was to get out, to get an education and move on. And how any Liberal could support that, I don't know what it was. Whether they, I suspect it's because, the elites, the ruling classes and people who sit around on dinner tables were sucked in by all that, and they just didn't want to be left out. They just went along with it. And in fact, I know editors of newspapers who went along with it for the most brainless and senseless of it. Notions of spirituality, it'll just be a good thing. No, it's harmful. There is a nasty underbelly to this stuff. Anyway, there we go.
You mentioned mindset, and I guess that goes back to your book, Burden of Culture, where you try and make the argument that there's a lot of cultural things within the Aboriginal people that are hurting them as well. It's not all just sunshine and lollipops and rainbows out in some of these communities. You've made some clips with Close the Gap Research on the YouTube page. I'm going to play a couple of them now, and then we'll discuss them, because I think this needs to be talked about, more, because we need to understand Aboriginal culture as well before we can think about even integrating Aboriginal people into the broader community and fixing some of the issues that they face. So this one's on humbugging.
If somebody has a job and they're earning money, and at the end of their fortnight when they get paid, they take their money home and they have 10 or 15 relatives who have been sitting around all week doing nothing with their hands out to take that money off them, and they end up with nothing for themselves, why would they work? And the reality is they won't. We have...
So she says it right there. I mean, it's understandable. If you're going and slaving away at work all day and then you come home and your family members are sitting there with their hand out waiting, like, where's the incentive? I mean, the mindset, the incentive, the ambition, there's no way that it can really develop when you're in those circumstances. So that's one thing that definitely needs to change, isn't it?
Yes. You remember the great Aboriginal painter Albert Namatjira was said to have 600 people living off his earnings. The more you earn, the more cousins you get. And it drags that person down. It would drive you to drink. And I learned this 30 years ago from the first people I started, Aboriginal leaders I started to talk to, who would describe me humbugging, and they said they just had to get away. You couldn't survive or develop with that sort of thing. So what I want to get across to political leaders is essentially it's a cultural debate. And if you don't change mindsets, if you don't change culture and your views, you're never going to escape. But what I find increasingly is that the white and Aboriginal leaders say to us, we have to work with Aboriginal culture. And I say, look, that's fine to the extent that either it's not illegal, like payback, or it doesn't stop a person getting on with their life, like humbugging. And when you hit that, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep saying, no, I respect their culture? Or are you going to say, well, I'll respect it up to the point that it stops you from being a successful citizen? At that point, I say, you've got some re-education to do. You've got to learn that if you can't hang on to your money, you can't buy a house, a car, feed your family, or whatever. So we should call out bad culture. We should call out bad behaviour. Otherwise, all is lost. That's why I'm so against this notion of community development. It's mindset development. It's the values we bring and perhaps brought up under that to some extent will determine our chances in life. And to the extent that a person is more cultural, is more Aboriginal, living on country, their chances of doing well in this world are diminished.
Now, I've had a caller call in. Let's see what they have to say. Richard, welcome. You'll just have to come off mute, Richard, so we can hear you.
Hello, Dr. Johns.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. I've read your book. I'm a great admirer of you. I've followed your decades of service to our country through government and then as an activist and an academic. I'm just in awe. So thank you so much for all your service. And I found your book just absolutely compelling. I don't disagree with anything you've ever written. The only comment I want to make is that I think everyone looks at the government to sort this whole imbroglio out. And I don't think the government is the only resource or the only source of funds. And I said to Jacinta Price, I said, how are you going getting your $11 million for your boarding school? And she goes, not well. And if anyone recalled Senator Ayres attacking her and telling her that she was doing it for her own personal aggrandizement and it was all political, it was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in the Senate. But I said to her, how about you blackmail all those companies that contributed to The Voice and get them to put in exactly the same amount of money that they gave to the Voice campaign? Then you'd have all the money you could ever need for schools.
Yep. Richard, thank you for all your support and your kind comments. And I don't disagree, you know. I wouldn't blackmail's strong, but the point is,
part of my idea is to get the prime ministers, the ex-prime ministers, to do the fundraising. Can you imagine anyone trying to refuse Paul Keating?
No, pretty hard. But the idea is right. There's plenty of money. It has to be put to better ends. That is, to get those children out of those places. You know, all of us had to stay in school for quite a long time before we could really operate in this world. I looked at a remote community settlement up in Cape York just the other day, and almost no one goes past. It's one of the few that has a kindergarten to year 12 school in situ, and there are more than 1,000 kids in the school, but there are only a handful at year 10, one or two at year 11, one or two at year 12, but the attendance rate for year 10 was 20%. They didn't turn up. Nothing was happening. So you've got this thing that looks like a school and lots of people running around and employed, but no one comes out the other end. They're the mob I'm interested in, and that's where the money has to be applied to boarding schools in a regional area.
Yeah,
to nicely say, kids, we're off, and to normalise that, to say, it's okay, this is what we do. And it'll take some years and there'll be failure and kids will want to run away. We know all the stories, but they're really good people, Richard, who run boarding schools, have lots of experience, understand that massive chasm between a kid being brought up in a remote community and going to school in a regional boarding school. Don't send them way down south, if possible. The money is there. You're right. It should come from mining companies, from CEOs, from all of the yes camp to say, do something useful, not do that nasty stuff you tried in the referendum in 2023.
Yeah, can I make another suggestion? That we actually get the companies that we blackmail to actually build the schools and to staff them with their own staff. So we get a whole national movement and get companies to actually build a culture of actually performing service for the community. And they can second their own staff on 6 months leave or 2 years leave to go to remote areas, to go into these situations as successful mentors, to actually look after these kids and actually shepherd them into adulthood.
Well, I disagree to this extent. A lot of that has been tried up in the Cape York. And what can happen is that you end up with a sort of a pet school, right? So Labor tried this for years in Queensland. They'd have a CEO or a head of a department that say, oh, well, blah, blah community will be mine, and I'll go up twice a year. And what inevitably happens, and I do have examples which I can't give you publicly, is to say, oh, well, look, my community's not doing so well. Can you throw another $1 million in it? So the head of department would just take the money and put it into their community. And it's still no good outcome. Or you'd send up a deputy CEO or a senior officer or whatever. But inevitably, it was still a pet. It was a pet project. And the idea was that we will keep you there sitting in that place, listening to the white man who comes and says, blah, 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 and then gives us some money. And that's what we've been doing since the 70s. Don't go blah, blah, blah and give them money, give them nothing. other than the offer to get those children out of there, because remember, the object is to change the mindset, the culture. So, Richard, it's got some spurs on that one. You can, good people ought to go and help, but don't do it on the idea that there's a pet project there and you can keep people there.
Yeah, it was more that you would get a company like Macquarie Bank building a Macquarie Bank school and staffing it, so that they would then invite children to come and board there. And
yeah, I'd move that slightly. I'd say Macquarie Bank, go to the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Lutherans, the other Christian schools and others, and help them, because they've been at it for 100 years in some cases. They live in the Coolgardis, Kalgoorlis of the world. They take kids from the bush. They know what they're doing. So don't you start mucking around, Macquarie. You make good money. You give that money to those boarding schools that know their business. They are, if you like, the new missionaries, or the missionaries that left, that were doing good work, but lost their social license.
So how can the company actually participate and involve and get their own people involved in that? There's got to be a pathway so the company can actually get a connection into that community and actually build up their own culture.
I think that's not necessary. The important thing is, what do we do in life? We buy things. We don't. You can volunteer, of course, but we say, I don't know, I want a car. I don't want to build it. I don't want to learn how to build it. I just want to buy it. So what I'm saying to the Macquaries is, give us your money and buy expertise, because you don't have it, and having a little toy around with it for 6 months or a year is not going to give it to you. You might have a nice experience or a bad one. Give the money to those who know how to save kids, and put a Macquarie badge on the front of the school if you like. But the main thing is to pay people who know what they're doing. So, Richard, we're not a great loggerheads, but you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I do. I'm looking for a way to integrate the actual need of the company, which is to actually build a culture. And one of the problems we've got in the city, and this is the basis of the teal movement, is people are looking for a way to feel a connection to a community.
Yeah,
that's what the whole need is that's underlying the teals. And what we've got to do is refocus that desire into something that's productive instead of something that's, a propaganda machine.
Yeah, look, I agree entirely on the teals, and it's right. It's like, can we get them concentrating on something useful?
Yeah. My wife said it beautifully. She said that you've got all these people with big empty lives that are trying to fill it with some sort of meaning. So let's give them the meaning.
Your wife could say that. I couldn't possibly.
Well, thanks. We'll have to let you go, Richard, because we're getting towards the end. I want to squeeze in a few more issues. But thanks for calling in, mate. Much appreciated. We'll talk soon.
All right.
All right, thank you, Richard. Now, as I said, we're right at the end, but I want to squeeze in a few more issues, if that's okay with you, Dr. Johns. I was going to play a clip, but I might just ask you about payback. That's another one of these mindsets that we need to change. I know that some people might think that's rich coming from a white person saying that Aboriginal mindset needs to change, but this is a serious issue, and it does happen. I mean, you hear Jacinta Price talk about this. You hear about a lot of Aboriginal people talk about this payback mentality that happens with Aboriginal communities. Do you want to explain it a little bit and then make a comment?
Yeah. In a traditional society, Aboriginal or not, there were no administrative means by which you could sit down, consider evidence, hold a prisoner, take a vote, and free someone or not free someone on the basis of truth or facts, if you like. Because it was such a spiritual sort of place, people would say something went wrong to Auntie whatever. She died. So you have to be blamed. So partly it was a sort of an irrational thing, and then partly, well, we'll blame you, so we will pay you back for the death of Auntie. And you can't disprove that you didn't kill Auntie, or sorry, that she didn't die when she was in your care. So it's partly a lack of understanding, lack of knowledge of how things occur, say illness and death. And then it's that immediacy that I have no way to really test this. So at best that I just take out my anger on you. You are the nearest person. And then when I've done that, the matter is settled. But we couldn't possibly have that in our society. We would have to go for knowledge, evidence, proof, etc., etc. But payback is alive and well in outback Australia, and it's deadly. It's nasty. And again, we have to change that mindset. And yet there are learned people of the law in this country since the 1980s have been arguing that we should almost write into law a recognition of LORE, Aboriginal traditional law. I mean, that's just crazy stuff. If someone spears someone else or hits them over the head, they have to be taken before a court, charged, taken before a court, and with proof, and if found guilty, and then punished. Unfortunately, we sort of relented almost, and we looked the other way, and various magistrates and even judges from the Northern Territory have simply gone along with it. To some extent, I understand that. They said, look, I can put the bloke in jail for 6 months for having done wrong. When he gets back out, he'll still be speared because of payback, and that's like a double penalty. To which I say, well, go and protect him from being speared, or go and talk to others who tell them that they're at risk. If they spear them, they too will end up in jail. In other words, break the culture, change the mindset. So we can't allow a payback mentality to remain. It was the mentality of our forebears and just about any crude society, but it is no longer acceptable and shouldn't be.
Something that's no longer becoming acceptable, well, it seems there seems to be a growing movement against it, or a growing feeling against it, is this welcome to country. We're starting to hear it booed at sporting events and different places. People are really starting to voice their disapproval of welcome to country. And again, I think that, I don't like to see that, because again, it's just perpetuating this divide. I think about, you talk to Aboriginal people and they say, well, we don't like it because it puts the focus on us and it's generating a lot of negativity towards us. Yeah. It feels to me that welcome to country is reaching its use-by date, and I don't think we probably should have started with it in the beginning. Is it time to move away from welcome to country?
Oh, yes. It's a falsity. It was only made up in the 70s. And if you like, a traditional welcome to country would be some Aboriginal bands might cross into another's lands. If, for instance, they wanted to hunt there, then that would cause conflict. It wasn't a welcome at all. And there are many stories written by early observers, is that you would send your women across. That'd be the welcome to country. And they would be, quote unquote, used. That'd be the cost, that'd be the price. So the real, if you like, history of welcome to country is not a pretty one at all. Why the hell would you want to do this? The other part of it is the acknowledgement of elders and culture. Why would you acknowledge somebody you've never met? Why would you acknowledge a culture that has significant and nasty elements to it? I'm sick to death of public servants sort of acknowledging elders. Why do you do that? They have it in the signature blocks of people, say, at the tax office, as if, what, they shouldn't pay taxes? Why are you talking to one group and not all taxpayers? It's just appalling the way we abuse our magnificent system, which treats us all as, for instance, a taxpayer, and that is my business with you and the tax office, not as an Aboriginal person. What about a non-Aboriginal person? It's appalling, the politicisation of our public services and our public discussion. There should be no welcomes to country unless you're with a particular group of Aboriginal people and they want to welcome you to their home or onto their native title area or one of their outlets. That's fine. That'll be like me coming, you visit my place and I say, come in, mate, have a cup of tea. It might be a bit more elaborate than that, but that is where it has meaning, not in a football stadium when you're on no one in particular's land and you pay some bloke to come on and dress the part who would normally be in a suit or in high vis the next day. That's just theatre. It's theatre without a payoff. It's just wrong.
Yeah, well, look, you've spoken about changing the mindset of Aboriginal people when it comes to humbugging and payback and cultural things like that. But we also need to change the mindset of the political class pushing all this stuff as well, because it does have dire consequences for Aboriginal people living in these communities and in these circumstances. Do you think that will happen? Do you think, we're already hearing talks about treaty and Magarata commissions and different things like that. It seems to be getting worse, not better. Will there be a turnaround, do you think?
Look, Stephen, I hope so. That's what keeps me going. We just have to hope. We know it's all crazy. We know it's harming Australia. The trouble is, most Australians don't know anything about the area, and they don't care that much because there are very few Aborigines in Australia. They don't come across many, and the big mistake that Albanese made as Prime Minister was to go to a referendum on this, change the constitution. Then everyone had to take notice, even if just for a short while, and they said, no, we don't like this stuff. And then they all go back to their own lives. So it's very difficult to, if you like, build an ongoing no case. But we just have to do it bit by bit. Everyone knows it's a farce. Everyone knows it's a try-on. They're just milking us. But no one wants to do much about it because it's not a big part of their lives. And meanwhile, senior public servants, Aboriginal leaders and mainly the left of the Labor Party just roll on because, after all, it's only money, isn't it? And they're very good at wasting it.
I'm just going to squeeze in one more question as well, just to go back to the referendum. And you actually said this in the podcast that we did with you prior to the referendum, that you wouldn't have been surprised that Labor people voted against it. Now, I think people fall into the mistake of, the people were using this argument during the last federal election, thinking that the Labor seats that voted no to the referendum would then abandon Labor and jump to the Liberal Party. I think that was completely wrong, because I think people can make the distinction between a referendum and a federal election, and also state elections as well. But to go back to your point that Labor people would abandon Anthony Albanese in the referendum and vote no to the Voice, were you surprised? I mean, you almost predicted that would happen. What do you think some of the reasons for that were?
Not surprised in general terms, but hugely surprised. There were, I think, 25 federal seats where the no vote, got to get this right, the no vote was higher than Labor. Yeah, the no vote was higher than the Labor vote, meaning 20% of Labor voters, in some seats, 30% of Labor voters of the Labor vote taken in 2022 was higher than the yes vote. So that's a huge slice of Labor people said no to the Labor proposition. Now, what that indicated to the Liberals was, hello, maybe we can prize some of these voters away on the right sort of issue. The hard bit is which issues, and clearly it didn't happen at the last election. But the obverse was also true, that in those sort of teal seats, you had a higher yes vote than the Liberal vote. So you had clearly a vulnerability there that subsequently became true, or has become true, that the teals who would vote Liberal were in fact voting yes against the Liberal position. But again, it makes the point there are there are issues out there, I think immigration might be one of them, where you may be able to appeal to people who don't normally vote your way. And that's something that the coalition are going to have to think about seriously.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. Now, I want to encourage everyone to head to your website, closethegapresearch.com.au, but also head to the YouTube channel as well.
.com, but yeah.
Sorry, closethegapresearch.org.au. Thank you for correcting me. But I want to encourage everyone to go to the YouTube page as well, because you've got, I mean, I've played some of the clips on the podcast today, but there's a whole host of clips here where you've interviewed people in these communities and gone to really the front line to speak to people about what's happening in Aboriginal communities and hear, you know, what's really going on, not just hearing the political spin about these. So head to that. You can find that on YouTube. And as I said, I'll correct myself this time and say the website correctly. It's closethegapresearch.org.au, and people can sign up. Is that right? Do you get a newsletter or something that goes along with that?
Yes. In the normal way, go on and put in your details, and we sort of we'll try for a more regular monthly newsletter now. We're not going to bug you all the time. We'd rather spend most of our time writing and producing the videos and animations and papers and lobbying, frankly, but at the same time, we want to let you know what we're up to, and of course, seek your support.
Yes, definitely. And you're writing some books. Are they set to come out soon, or still a work in progress?
Later this year, there'll be an edited book published by Quadrant. The working title is The Aboriginalisation of Australia. And that will continue this theme, saying, look, we are being overtaken here, and for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, we've got a lot of fires to put out in this country, it seems, but we'll carry on. And look, I really appreciate you coming on, and also, having the courage to speak on a lot of these issues, because I think most people listening would understand your common sense when it comes to a lot of these things, but they're probably too scared to say it themselves. So we need champions like yourself to get this stuff out there, and hopefully we can change the public perception as we go forward, and hopefully we can change the mindset of people living in these communities, but also the political class pushing a lot of the policies that are unfortunately hurting people in the real world. So thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for all that you do, and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and keep up the good work.
Great. And for everyone watching, please share this out. I say it every single time, but we really do rely on the audience to get this information out there and to spread the word. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you.